Okay, so this video is going to be looking at the preparations for 480 BC. We're going to be reading through quite a lot of Herodotus, so you're going to need to find 7.1 first, and then all the different parts of the source will lead on from that particular point. We'll also be looking at a Persian inscription from Persepolis. So these sources are going to talk through different perspectives about the preparations for 480 BC. We're going to start with the Persian preparations, and then we're going to look at the Greek preparations, including the formation of something called the Hellenic League. But we're going to start with Persia. And Herodotus being Herodotus, we need to keep in mind that obviously this is a Greek viewpoint of the Persian discussions and preparations for the war. We also need to keep in mind as well that Herodotus was obsessed with showing that Persian hubris or Persian arrogance was one of the main reasons why the Persians lost the Persian War. And there are sections that we're going to have a look at today that are going to really show this kind of obsession with this hubris. Right, anyway, so preparations for 480, we're still talking about initially Darius, who obviously was the king of Persia at the time of the Battle of Marathon. So when the message concerning the fight of Marathon came to Darius, so he was already really angry with the Athenians because they attacked Sardis. He was now much more angry and eager to send an expedition against Hellas. So he obviously is like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we lost the Battle of Marathon. We need to go fight back." And he sends some messengers to all the cities, commands them to equip an army, to provide more ships and horses and provisions and transport vehicles. So when we talk about needing evidence for the effects of conflict, so obviously we have here lots of Medai states being forced to produce or give over resources for the Persians. That would also cause quite a big economic impact on that particular place. Anyway, so they got all those different things getting built. We've got Asia in commotion with these messages for 3 years. This is how long the preparations were going on for. As the best men were enrolled for service against Greece and made preparations. At the same time as all of this, you have the Egyptians, who were part of the Persian Empire revolt. And Darius is even more eager to send expeditions because obviously he's got a country under his control that is revolting. However, Darius dies. Can't remember what of, but he dies. So then, after his death, we have his son Xerxes who comes to power. So initially, Xerxes at first by no means eager to march against Hellas. It was against Egypt that he mustered his army. So his sort of focus initially is on Egypt, not particularly on Greece. But then we have Mardonius. He is back. So he obviously was out of favour with Darius after his failed expedition in the 490s. He is going to regain some prestige by influencing Xerxes instead. So we have Mardonius, was with the king and had more influence with him than any other Persian. He's going to put some arguments forward of why Xerxes should attack Greece now and not just focus on Egypt. So he argues, Master, it is not fitting that the Athenians should go unpunished for their deeds. So again, remember, we're not talking about Ionian War anymore. Ionian Revolt. We're now also talking about Battle of Marathon. After all the evil they've done to the Persians. So that's clearly Battle of Marathon. For now you should do what you have in hand. Then, when you have tamed the insolence of Egypt, lead your armies against Athens, so that you may have fair fame among men, so you become really famous and a greater king as a result of it, and others may be aware of invading your realm in the future. So there's a couple of key arguments in there. There's obviously punish the Athenians. There's also about gaining more land and have a better reputation essentially than your father, but also to protect the empire going forwards. So his arguments was for vengeance, but he kept adding that Europe was an extremely beautiful land, one that bore all kinds of orchard trees, a land of highest excellence. So there may be an element as well as an economic argument here. So yes, the land's really good. It can give us lots of resources as well. And then Herodotus decides to give us possibly the true reason behind Mardonius' argument. So he said this because he desired adventures and wanted to be governor of Hellas. So one of the key themes we look at is the role of individuals in causes of conflict, and we have obviously Mardonius' role in helping to persuade Xerxes, but also his own personal desire to go and take over lands as well. So finally he worked on Xerxes, persuaded him to do this, and other things happened that helped him to persuade Xerxes. So it's not just him, but there are other things happening. So we have messengers come from Thessaly, and they invite the king into Greece with all earnestness. So there's Greeks inviting the Persians in. There is also these guys, which I have no idea how to pronounce, who also use the same please. So they sort of say, please come and help us. Let me highlight that because I forgot to do it. And also there's an exiled Athena diviner, which is basically an oracle reader. It gives you like a really exciting story about why he's in exile. But either way, there's an oracle, and he chooses and recites such prophecies that are most favourable to the Persians, telling how the Hellespont must be bridged by man of Persia and describing the expedition. So why this guy decides to do it, probably because he wants to be brought back into Greece, but he's obviously using the oracles to persuade him. So it's not just Mardonius, there's other reasons too. So after being persuaded to send an expedition against Hellas, Xerxes first marched against the rebels in the year after Darius' death. So he basically goes to Egypt, subdues them, lays Egypt under a much harsher slavery than in the time of Darius. So again, we've got the effects of conflict there. And he hands it over to his family, and it's therefore back under Persian control. So after the conquest of Egypt, intending now to take in hand the expedition against Athens, Xerxes held a special assembly of the noblest amongst the Persians so he could learn their opinions. So this is the council of the king. So he's going to bring together the key people, and he's going to declare what he wants them to do. So he says, you're not bringing into new custom, but it's one I've inherited, so my dad did the same sort of thing. I learned from our elders, and So this is how, by listening to our elders and working together, this is how we've sort of won sovereignty. And this is the will of heaven. We ourselves win advantage by our many enterprises. So he's saying, we've got this history of conquering places. Because the gods favour us, therefore we will continue to win if we go and fight. And he sort of mentions a few places like some of his family done, like Cyrus, and his father had obviously subdued some lands and added to the realm. And ever since I came to the throne, I've considered how I might not fall short of my predecessors in his honour. So he basically wants to live up to his family's reputation, particularly his father, and wants to add to the realm. Fair enough, that's quite typical in sort of the ancient world in terms of living up to your father's reputation. So there is this pressure on Xerxes that he's feeling also to attack. And he says, not only will we gain renown, so sort of like greater land, but actually we're going to get some sort of economic benefits. So a land neither less nor worse and more fertile than we possess, so we gain some fertile land. We also get vengeance and requital, which obviously is against Athens in particular. So for this cause I have summoned you together and may impart to you what I intend to do. So it's my intent to build bridge the Hellespont, and lead my army through Europe to Hellas, so I may punish the Athenians for what they've done to the Persians and to my father. So I'm out for revenge, going to get land, going to get renown, hurrah. That's the plan. Okay? And he said, he saw that my dad had done the same thing, but he's dead and he hasn't been able to punish them. So it's on his behalf that I will never rest until I've taken Athens and burnt it for the unprovoked wrong that its people did to my father and me. I'm not sure it was unprovoked, but obviously that is the Persian viewpoint, or certainly it's Herodotus' version of the Persian viewpoint. And then he gives his reasons. They came to Sardis and they burnt the temple. And then how they dealt with us when we landed on their shores. So how dare the Athenians, defend the Greek land when the Persians invade? When we also got Datis and Artaphernes, and that's also Battle of Marathon was referring to here. So for these reasons, I'm resolved to send an army against them. I reckon we will find the following benefits. The key thing he points out is that we will make the borders of Persian territory and of the firmament of heaven be the same. So i.e. we're going to extend the Persian Empire out so large that we will be like meeting the heavens. So that's the key thing. And he also points out that no city of men or any human nation was able to meet us in battle will be left. So we conquer these guys, there's no one left to conquer, we've conquered everybody. This is fantastic. And we're going to punish everybody, everyone's going to become slaves, and this is my plan. Okay. So then we're going to have members of the Persian court speaking. Obviously, Mardonius is going to speak first because he's the one who really wants him to go. So Master Usuparsoni, not only all Persians that have been, that also shall be. So you're brilliant than your predecessors. You can be the best ever. Besides having great dealt excellently and truly with all that matters. You will not suffer the Ionians who dwell in Europe to laugh at us. So this is the revenge argument there again, which they have no right. They have no right to do. So, you've got the Ionians who revolted and they're laughing at you. The Athenians are laughing at you. We've got to go and do something about it. It would be strange indeed if we who had subdued and made slaves of the Sakai, I think, and Indians and Ethiopians and Assyrians, and many other great nations, for no wrong done to the Persians, but of mere desire to add to the power, will not take vengeance on the Greeks for unprovoked wrongs. So he's putting it in the context of sort of previous Persian action. We've conquered these great lands, and, essentially they'd done nothing to us, and now we have the Greeks who have done something to us, and we're not going to attack them. It's a bit crazy. So he probably has a fair point. And then he says, what do we have to fear from them? Have they a massive population of wealth? Implied no. Their manner of fighting we know, and we know how weak the power is, so we know what we're facing. We know they're a bit rubbish. We've conquered some places like Naxos, etc., and we hold their sons in slavery, and we sort of control the Ionians and the Arab groups. So I'm sort of missing out some key information about the Battle of Marathon here, and how obviously the Greeks are the Athenians in particular, are completely overwhelmed the Persians. But he's not going to mention that. They're rubbish. We fought against them once. We know what we're doing. And, he says, I marched as far as Macedonia and almost to Athens itself, and no one even came out to meet me. So he sort of says, these guys can't even bother to defend their land properly. And they fight against each other, and when they do it really weirdly and with great folly, and they always come to the best land. They come down to Pharos ground and fight there, and then the victors sort of come out really badly, and the vanquished are destroyed, so they weaken themselves by fighting each other. At the end, they should really end the disputes by sort of messengers, but they don't. They always make war on each other, and they're always attacking people they think are stronger than them. And he's sort of going, the Greeks are a bit weird here. They're always fighting. They're weakest because as a result of it. So why are we not doing it? And then he points out, you'll bring, thousands of people from Persia. You have all these ships. And they would be taught a lesson that we are the greatest warriors on earth. So there's nothing we can't do because we're Persia, and Persia are brilliant, is basically what this is saying. So therefore, Mardonius soothes Xerxes' resolution and stops. So he basically is telling everything that Xerxes wants to hear, and Xerxes is sitting there going, yep, nodding along, absolutely brilliant. So the rest of the Persians in the court hold their peace, not daring to utter an opinion, because obviously they know this is what Xerxes really wants to do. And then we have his uncle, Artabanus, who steps forward. And because he's his uncle, he obviously feels like he's able to say something, because he's like, this is crazy. Which is going to be basically the argument he's going to make. So, if opposition is not uttered, it's possible not to choose the better one. So you need to hear both arguments, otherwise you can't choose whichever one is the better solution. And hopefully we can sort of determine the best thing to do. So he says, I advised your father Darius not to lead his army against the Scythians, who have no cities anywhere to dwell in. And he went on the expedition and returned after losing many gallant men from his army. So he says, I told your dad not to fight these guys. And, they went on the expedition and they lost loads and loads of armies. And so again, what you're proposing is to lead your army against better men than the Scythians. So, we struggled against these guys. We're not going to do much better against the Greeks. And he points out the Greeks are, I think I'll highlight that because it's a good quote, are excellent warriors by sea and land. So he's like, I need to tell you how dangerous this is going to be. So he says, you will bridge the Hellespont and reach your army through Europe to Hellas. And then he's like, well, okay, that's fine, but now suppose you happen to be defeated by either land or by sea or even by both. So he's going to point out all the possible problems. So we know that the Athenians by themselves destroyed this fantastic army led by Datis and Artaphernes at the Battle of Marathon. And he sort of says, if they attack with the ships and there's a sea fight and then they sail to the Hellespont and destroy our bridge, we're stuck because we can't get back. Fair point to raise. And he says, I know what disaster once overtook us in terms of this happening previously, because your dad made a bridge over this Thracian area, bridged a river, and essentially the same thing happened. So he's pointing out, don't plan to run the risk of such danger when there's no need to do it. He's like, there's no reason why you need to build this bridge and go across into Athens. It's just a waste of energy and resources. It's not going to be as easy as you think it's going to be. These Greeks are much better than previous people we'd fought. And they've already defeated us at Marathon. So, just as he points out, a well-laid plan is, to my mind, most profitable, which is a motto for life. Plan ahead and maybe you'll do better. And then he points out, if the plan's no good, we'll baffled and we'll be destroyed if we haven't got a good plan. And does not suffer them to, and he says the gods will not suffer them to display their pride. So this is this argument that Herodotus is always trying to put forward, that the Persians had this hubris, particularly Xerxes' hubris. There's this arrogance that, because they're Persia, they're going to win. And he's saying, the gods will punish this pride. We need to, think about it a bit more carefully. We're not just going to defeat them because we're Persian. And he points out, a large army is destroyed by smaller when the jealous gods send panic or the thunderbolts among them. The gods will punish us because we're just assuming we're going to defeat the Greeks. And he then goes on further, sort of criticising Mardonius a little bit more specifically. He says, you slander the Greeks, you incite the king to send his expedition, that is the end to which you press with all eagerness. So he's saying, you're slating the Greeks by pointing out how weak and terrible they are, just because you really want to go and fight. And he's sort of saying, don't let this be. Slander is really bad. Everybody suffers. Slander wrongs by accusing an absent man, and the other does wrong in that he's persuaded before he's learnt the whole truth. So just by sort of saying that the Greeks are really weak, it's not the truth, and we're going to go and fight because Mardonius wants to go and fight. He probably has a point here, to be fair to him. So he says, let's not go for this plan, let's do something else. If an army must by all means be sent by the Greeks, hear me now. Let the king himself remain in Persian land, so Xerxes should stay at home, and let us two, as in Mardonius and Artabanus, get my name right around, send our children, as in their sons, and if it turns out as bad as I tell it's going to be, and let your sons be so treated if you return. So if we are defeated really badly and the sons come back, you can punish them if our sons are slain, but at least then and the king is safe. So he says, if you're willing to do this and at will or hazards lead your army to Hellas, I think if those we left behind in space will hear Mardonius have done them great harm to Persia. Because essentially, in theory, the king could be killed going on this expedition, and that's the point he's trying to make. Now, we don't hear the whole argument because the exam board skips a massive chunk of it, and we end up with the end of his argument in 7.49. So you've got Artabanus sort of is responding to another person, and he says, there is no fault that any man of sound judgment could find, either with this army or with a number of ships. Hang on, sorry, I'm just rereading that. So he's sort of saying, if you gather more men, there's even going to be even more problems in invading Greece. So we still have the issue of the land and the sea. So the sea has no harbour, and if there's a storm, your ships will be destroyed because there's no harbour to land at. Fair point. And so he says, hang on, sorry. There has to be lots of these little harbours. It's not like you need one harbour. You need lots of harbours because the fleet's going to be massive. And there are no harbours. He's making this point. So there's going to be a major issue. So the sea's not a good idea. The land is an issue because the land, and this is a really good point he makes, the land becomes more your enemy the further you advance, constantly unaware of what lies beyond. So the further you get away from home, the less of the land you know. So if you don't understand the land, you're not going to win a war. It's a very common military thing. I'm not a great military historian, but even I know this, that you need to be aware of the land ahead of you and the people before you go and invade somewhere. Just look at anyone who attacks Russia, for example, through history. It's colder than you think it's going to be. and it always turns out badly because people don't understand the land. So this is the point he's also making, obviously not about Russia. So we've made Greece, you think you know the lands, but the more you go into inland, we've never been there, we don't know what's going to happen. And ultimately, we will breed famine as a result of it because we just won't have the resources to cope. So Xerxes sort of listens to both sides of the argument, and he says, yes, you're right, you're being battered, very reasonable, but he clearly knows what he wants to do. He says, do not fear everything. Don't be worried. Sorry, I'm just rereading what it says. And he sort of makes the argument, those who have the will to act most often win the rewards, not those who hesitate and take account of all chances. So those who dare wins, which I think is the motto of the SAS. But that's basically his point. So those who just think about all the possible things that might happen never win. So let's just go do it. Let's just go fight. Which you could argue is Herodotus proving his hubris argument yet again. And he makes this point here. So great successes are not won except by great risks. He has a point. That's a fair motto to live your life by. He says, we're going to travel in the best season. We will return home, the conquerors of all Europe, without suffering famine or any other harm. We're just going to win because we're brilliant. And we'll camp ample provisions with us on our march, and we have all the food of those that we conquer. So, we're going to be fine. So clearly, Xerxes is going to want to go and fight no matter what anybody was going to say. So they're going to fight anyway. Now, what we can tie into this argument, especially early on, about what Mardonia was pointing out, is this inscription Persepolis. So this is a Persian inscription. What Ahura Mazda, remember, is the god of the Persians, and the inscription says, he's a great god, creates the earth, creates the sky, creates the man, creates happiness, who made Xerxes king, king of many, one lord of many. So I talked earlier about this idea that the king has this kind of pressure to live up to his family and his ancestors. And if you're chosen by the gods who create everything, that's a lot of pressure on you. He says, I am Xerxes, great king, king of kings, king of lands containing many men, king of this earth great, far and wide. He's got to keep conquering because this is what happens. This is what Persian kings do. May Ahura Mazda protect me and my kingdom, and what was built by me and what was built by my father. So again, my father has continued to build this land. I must continue his work because that is what good Persian kings do. Okay. There's another person speaking at the council, and he points out, we're going to skip this first part, that the main issue is going to be the Lacedaemonians, who are the Spartans. So he says, first they will never accept the conditions about bringing slavery to Hellas, they're never going to surrender, and they're going to meet you in battle even if the other Greeks decide to Medize and go to the Persians. So he's pointing out that we need to watch out for the Spartans in particular. So that's the Persian kind of viewpoint of this expedition that's going to happen. What we then have, invasion, the Greeks' preparation for the invasion, because they hear what's coming. They have some spies. They know the Greek state's being conquered. They know that Xerxes is going to be coming back. So what Xerxes does in 480 as part of the invasion is that he sends some heralds to demand earth. So remember, demand of earth and waters to submit to Persian rule. Some of these heralds come back empty-handed, so some Greeks refuse, and some obviously decide to Medize. And then Herodotus tells us essentially who's on which side. So those who Medize, we've got Thessaly, Dolopes, the Ennes, them. Most of these places, to be honest, we're not really that bothered about. Probably the most important ones are the Thebans, so those from Thebes, and most of Boeotia. But Plataea decides not to Medize, which is not a surprise because they fought at the Battle of Marathon. So against all of these, the Greeks, they sort of... Oh, sorry. I should have highlighted this. So the rest of the Greek states basically form an agreement, which is called the Hellenic League, so the Greek League. And they decide they're going to put differences aside and they're going to fight together. So Xerxes doesn't bother to send any heralds to Athens and Sparta, and the reason why he chose this is because Darius had previously sent men to the same purpose. One had been So one in Athens had been pushed into a pit, and the one in Sparta had been kicked down a well, and they've both been killed. So he pretty much thinks, what's the point? Because these guys are not going to Medize. Fine. And then we have the official reason for the king's march is to attack Athens, but in reality, all of Hellas was his aim. So when we talked about the causes of conflict in terms of the individuals, like desires, etc., here's the one for Xerxes. He wants to conquer, and he also wants revenge. Another theme for causes of conflict is imperialism, which is very much this one here about the wall of Greece being the aim of the Persian kings. So this is the Greeks had long since learned, all of them regarded the matter alike. So again, when we talked about this being divisions, obviously we've got those who paid tribute of earth and water, and those who have refused the tribute as well. So we've got divisions in the Greeks, and what they're really worried about is there's not enough ships in Greece to do battle with the invaders. So they're really, really worried. Okay. So then this is when Herodotus is like, I'm going to put forward a really unpopular opinion. And he sort of says, if the Athenians had been panic struck and they had decided to surrender, then no Greeks would have attempted to withstand the kings by sea. So he sort of says, it's all down to Athens. If Athens had Medized, then obviously Greece would have been subdued by the Persians, and he says, as a result, the Athenians were the saviours of Hellas. It's the truth. It is the Athenians who held the balance of power. It's the Athenians who roused the battle of the other Greek states who have not gone over to the Persians. There's probably an element of truth to that. Obviously, if you remember as well, Athens was, the winners of the Battle of Marathon. That does their military reputation a huge amount of good. It gives them a reputation about being the element of being the saviour of Greece. But we've got to keep in mind that obviously Herodotus is hugely pro-Athenian. So, there's an element of truth to all of this, but whether it is the idea that because Athens didn't Medize, no one else, not no one else, but a lot of states didn't, we'll never know. We will never know. Right, so then we have the Athenian response. So they hear some messengers that people are Medizing, and they're a bit worried as a result, and they go to an oracle, and the oracle says this. I would read the oracle stuff to you, but oracle stuff never makes sense. It's not meant to, that's why there's always different interpretations. So there's some envoys, and they've written down the oracle's sayings. They go to Athens, and you have these difference of opinions about what the oracle means. So we've got some of the older men said the gods signified that the Acropolis, that's the sort of key centre of Athens, should be saved because there's something about wood, I don't know. And then others said that the gods was referring to the ships and that they were doing nothing but equipping these. So should they protect essentially the Acropolis or should they build the ships? And they don't really know what to do. So steps forward a man called Themistocles, who's incredibly important to the Greeks in the rest of the Persian War, hence why he is highlighted. So he claims that the oracles for both sides are completely wrong. And he says, the oracle's not speaking of Athens but of enemies, that they should believe that the ships to be the wooden wall and so make ready to fight at sea. So it's not about building ships, it's not about protecting the Acropolis, it's about these signifying the enemies, and we're going to be fighting a war at sea. Okay? Now, the reason why they decided to listen to Themistocles is because he'd been proven right previously, which is what this bit's talking about. So basically Athens found us loads of money at Larium, and what the assembly, sort of like the central government of Athens, was going to do was they were going to give 10 drachmae for each man living in Athens. And Themistocles was convinced that the Persians were going to come back and continue the war, and he was obviously proven right. But he knew that if he had said, right, we need to build the ships for Persia, they would have laughed at him. Because obviously, remember, the Athenians had beaten the Persians at the Battle of Marathon, and they didn't see Persia as being a threat anymore at this particular point. So essentially, he lies. So he says, yes, we need to build some ships, this for war against another city-state called Aegina. And Athens and Aegina never get on they never get on. So they built these ships because they were fighting Aegina. Now, Aegina literally had no issue with Athens at this particular point. There was no war. But Themistocles needed these boats to be built. So as a result, these ships not used for the purpose, but came to serve Hellas in their needs. So obviously once they hear that the Persians are invading, they know they have these ships, and they're like, Themistocles, you're so clever. And that's why they decide to listen to him and get ready to fight by sea instead. So Themistocles becomes a really important general in the Battle of Marathon. So then we have the formation of the Hellenic League. So the Greeks are concerned about the general welfare of Greece met in conference and exchanged guarantees. So they resolved in debate to make an end of all their feuds and wars against each other. So basically they're going to ignore the problems between each other and leave it to one side and fight together for the greater good. That includes, the Aegeans and the Athenians. They put their differences aside and they decide that they're going to work together. So they plan to send the army into Asia, send men, into Asia to spy what the king is doing, and they decide to send some to Argos because they really want Argos on side because they're really strong. And since the danger is threatened to all Greeks alike, all Greek blood might unite and work jointly for one command. So the many of the Greek states they can get together, they're going to be trying to do so. However, at the same time this is happening, so this bit here is referring to this bit here. The Argives had sent envoys to basically some Persians saying, are we still mates? Persians say yes, and so Argos decides not to join the Hellenic League. And that is the preparations. I will point out as well, which will come up in the source later on, that under the Hellenic agreement, the Spartans are voted to be the main military leader of the league, and they do that because the Spartans have the greatest military reputation. The Athenians were happy with this decision. It's a joint decision of the Hellenic League, and the Spartan will always be in the main commander, and then Athens becomes second. However, when it comes to things like the navy, obviously because Athens is a naval power primarily, they are going to obviously have the final say about the any naval action. But anyway, that summarises the sources on the preparations for the invasion of 480.